up, Mike. Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get the city love. My city love me back for my city love.
Welcome to episode 1396 of Toronto Mic'd. Proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Committing to our planet's future means properly recycling our electronics of the past. The Advantaged Investor Podcast from Raymond James Canada. Valuable perspective for Canadian investors who want to remain knowledgeable, informed, and focused on long-term success. Season 5 of Yes, We Are Open, an award-winning podcast for Moneris, hosted by FOTM Al Grego. And Ridley Funeral Home, pillars of the community since 1921. Today, returning to Toronto Mic'd is Rik Emmett. Welcome back, Rik.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be here once again.
Well, look, you had me at sir, okay? That's, oh my God, I'm not worthy, but a quick note. Firstly, I know we tried to connect last week, so I was promoting this thing for Friday, and then I said, I'm giving rock god Rik Emmett the benefit of the doubt that I'm sure it maybe it didn't make your calendar, maybe you blanked on it, but I said I'm giving this man the benefit of the doubt. But that was nothing personal. You'd simply maybe you blanked on the Zoom we had scheduled on Friday.
No, I got COVID. So, it was a weird weekend for me in a lot of ways. Yeah, and I've been stretching in a few different directions. I was finishing up an album project with a friend of mine named Blair Packham as an engineer.
Blair is a dear friend of this program.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Okay.
And he was the one that said, you should be talking to Toronto Mike again. You should be talking to, I went, okay. But yeah, I did blank. That I admit to that, because it was on the books, but it was just like Friday. I wasn't starting to feel well, and so I'm feeling a little bit better now. But I still have a little bit of COVID, but you can't catch it over the internet. So all right.
I'm safe. Okay. Well, Rik, part of the deal with COVID is brain fog. Like this is part of the thing. So you're fully excused. I feel terrible. I thought it was just a scheduling mishap, but you had COVID, and I'm glad you've recovered.
Yeah. Well, I'm not fully recovered, but just brain fogged enough to go. Yeah, a podcast that'll be fun. Sure, let's give that a shot.
Well, let's see how it goes. Let me ask you off the top. I didn't realize you were working with FOTM Blair Packham. That's friend of Toronto Mike. You're FOTM Rik Emmett. But what's it like working with Blair?
It was a complete 100% pleasure. Like Blair and I are kind of like little old ladies talking over the back fence, and he likes to tell stories and I like to tell stories. And the sessions will often start winding off on tangents. But it's kind of like I go, that's why I like to do it, so that right. I'm not necessarily getting into this really intense. Here's the thing about recording, and this was a solo. It's like jazz guitar pieces, kind of all electric solo guitar pieces. So the thing about it is I can get down on myself. I can really start getting into an intense kind of head right up my ass kind of thing, And having Blair around made it so that it was really good. And Blair has a lot of recording experience going back to his days of working with Doug. Oh God, Doug McClement. Yeah, McClements. Thank you. Yeah, there's the brain fog for you. But he cut his teeth there, and with Doug. And then of course, he's done so many of his own projects and done his own recording things and stuff. So in the end, I was having him bring his laptop over because he's got different plugins that he was telling me about his plugins. I go, well, okay, bring your rig over and let's do it. So I mixed with him, and we used a lot of his plugins, and it was just a pleasure. It was great. So
it's funny you mentioned Doug McClement's name because I recorded with him in December 2022, 1 year ago, and I didn't know it at the time, but I had COVID when I talked to Doug, so I always think of Doug McClement as the COVID guest of Toronto Mike, so just tie it all back to COVID.
That is good. I mean, I've worked with Doug many times because, of course, he's associated with Insight Productions,
right? And
I've done TV shows in years back. There was like Toronto Music Awards, and his truck would be the thing that would be doing those things. And
right,
yeah.
What a legend here. Okay, what's your review, Rik? You know music. What's your review of "Last of the Red Hot Fools" by the Jitters? Is that a great song or just an okay song?
No, it's fantastic. Are you kidding me? Like, I always liked Blair, always. And before I even knew him, I liked the whole Jitters thing. And he's always been kind of, the kind of artist that really loves the Elvis Costello kind of approach to writing tunes and making music. But of course, Blair is your downtown Toronto kind of personality and character. So there's that Canadian thing that he doesn't have anywhere near the chip on his shoulder that Elvis does, right. Which I love. And then he was the Bluebird guy for the Songwriters Association for years. And so I would go and do those Bluebirds with him, and I might go, this guy and I, there's something, there's kismet here or something, I don't know, there's karma, there's chi. There's all of those things.
Right.
So
well, I'm glad to hear you guys work together. So when can I hear this new album you put together with Blair's help?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so here's the thing. My plan for this one is that it'll be a record, but it'll also be a book.
Okay.
And so I'm writing the book. And the book is about the making of the album, but the book is also about the stories of the songs and the pieces. And it's also about becoming 70 years of age and having to cope with just the whole thing of part of what I have been is, how do I put this and not make it sound like I'm tooting my own horn too loud? Because I've been sort of a guitar hero on a certain level, but also been an academic on another. There's this whole thing of as you're getting older and maybe there's certain aspects of your skill set that are eroding, physically, but then mentally you're sort of trying to push at different edges of the boundaries of the envelope, and all that kind of stuff. But of course, there are guitar players out there that I can fully really appreciate what it is that they do. So, and this may not be people that are familiar to a lot of your listeners, but guys like Julian Lage, a jazz guitarist, fingerstyle. So that's just one example, but there's so many other Telecaster kind of guitar players. And I'm trying to do something that's going to be part of the canon of Telecaster guitar playing. So that's a huge, long history of stuff because it goes right back to, I was born in 1953. The Telecaster was born in about 1950, 51, 52 were the great years of, people that are trying to have guitar collections. They're searching for those kind of guitars. And you see Springsteen banging away on a Telecaster and Keith Richards, and you know what I mean? So there's a whole long history of this guitar, but it has a jazz side to it because there was Toronto's own, well, he wasn't originally from Toronto, but Ed Bickert was a jazz guitar player that people revere him as well they should. And he was a Tele guy. So I'm sort of trying to make a thing into this Tele history, and that's into the book. So, and I've got about, 60 pages of the book written. And I'm not sure it's going to be that long. I don't know. Who knows? But I know that my editor at ECW Press, Michael Holmes, he'd be keen on something like this. And I'm thinking, yeah, an album and a book, I don't know how you do that anymore, because if people buy the book, and are we going to bother manufacturing CDs to put in there? I don't know. Maybe, but maybe it just, I don't know, a thumb drive, a code.
Rik, I just talked to the manager of the Cloverdale Mall Sunrise Records, and he says they sell a ton of CDs there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I don't know. I mean, part of it too is I've just come out with this. I hate to be blowing my own horn about all of this stuff. There's a package called Diamonds, which is vinyl album and CD, and I got the masters from my old Duke Street years back, and so we've repackaged those and put them out. And the guy named Greg Campbell that runs Merch in Motion and Rock Paper Merch online, he's put out this vinyl thing. And there's people that are crazy about vinyl.
Right.
And I haven't done vinyl for a long time, but it was really weird to go. I was doing the interviews to set it up and stuff. And to listen to stuff again on, from a turntable, it's a different experience. And of course, the cutting of vinyl, I was never crazy about it, but here I am, revisiting things from the 70s.
Okay, Rik, lots of ground to cover there. It all sounds amazing. I'm going to just let the listeners know that if they want the A to Z of Rik Emmett's career, I'm going to tell them to go, you can pause this episode and go to episode 915 of Toronto Mic'd. And here's what I wrote. That was September 2021. And I wrote, in this 915th episode, Mike chats with Rik Emmett about his years in Triumph, why he left the band, his new book of poetry, and so much more. What's interesting to me is we chatted about your book of poetry then. You're talking about the next book, but I have a question from a gentleman named Dave Bedini, you might know, about this new book, which I just read, Lay It on the Line, A Backstage Pass to Rockstar Adventure, Conflict, and Triumph. And I just want to read, Dave, he has a 2-point question here for you, Rik. He writes, I hope you talked to Rik about appearing on the legendary call-in show on McLean Hunter TV with Kirk LaPointe. So put a pin in that. Come back to that. But then he also wants me to know, and the listeners to know, he says he got you your book deal. So what say you, Rik, about this McLean Hunter TV show? And also, did Dave Bedini get you your book deal now that you're a prolific author?
He did. Yeah. Okay. So first, Kirk LaPointe. So I knew him when he was a young and, pimply high school kind of, just out of high school kind of thing. Okay. So Triumph is on the rise, and in those days, and Kirk was too, he had a cable show in Etobicoke where he would interview, and it was a call-in show, which,
Scarlet Road, right? Scarlet Road?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I know this building. I've been there. Keep going. This is great.
Yeah, and so Kirk would interview rock stars and up and coming rock stars, and in this interview, at one point, and am I allowed to swear on the cable show?
You can swear.
Watch my mouth. Yeah. Okay. So he gets a phone-in call where somebody says to him, "Hey, Kirk," and he goes, "Yes." And they go, "Hey, Kirk, why don't you eat shit and die?" So he has to push the button and say, "Oh, I'm sorry." And he looks at me and he's going like, "Yeah, this stuff happens," And he goes, "Okay, get a couple more calls into the show." And he presses the button and a girl goes, "Hey, Rik, I'd really like to," and he has to hit the button again. She did get a little more out, but I'm not going to say. And so, I now I'm sitting there staring at him, and he's looking at me, and I go, "Well, Kirk, I liked my invitation better than yours." Anyways, he went on to become a heavy duty kind of newspaper editor kind of guy, and then he was working for CTV for a while, running. I think he ran the programming there or something. Anyhow, he moved up in the world, and
right.
I moved sideways.
But Badini got you the book deal. What's this? He's taking full credit for this great new book.
Like I'm a supporter of his West End Phoenix, and he'd invited me out to play, and I played a fundraiser thing for him one year, and then I was thinking about this book of poetry, and he said, "You know who would be a really good editor for you is Michael Holmes at ECW Press," and so he was the one that sort of opened up that conversation between Michael and I, and we really did hit it off, and I really do like Michael, and yeah, so now I've gone on and written my memoir. Now, I think the truth of the matter is, Dave can try to take credit for landing the deal, but I think my own wiles were such that I said, if I go to them and I say, look, I want you to put out a book of poetry. Nobody really wants a book of poetry from an old rock star. But if I also give you a deal where I promise I'll do a memoir later down the road. Smart. So I think that was the clincher. Dave set it up, but I think I was the one that, put the puck in the net, as it were.
Well, speaking of pucks in net, I'll just tell you, there's a recent episode of Toronto Mic'd where Ken Reed from Sportsnet was here, and he talked about how much he loved your book of poetry, and I thought it was great too. So there are a number of people who read and enjoyed your book of poetry.
Thank you. Yes. Well, I love the fact that it gave me just another tangent for creativity as I'm getting older. And it really did take my level of appreciation of writing. Because, I've been a songwriter all my life. And, of course, I wrote columns for guitar magazines. And, I've done a lot of writing. But in a very sort of Margaret Atwood way, when you write poetry, you're taking your writing down to this place of distillation and packing and unpacking kind of stuff, so that as a writer in so many other ways. And then I took this stuff that I'd done of writing the poetry book and writing the memoir, and then I took it into writing guitar pieces again, coming back to something that I know a fair bit about, but now being able to apply this. Yeah, it was really cool from an artistic, perspective. Poetry really is something. It really is its own thing that reflects onto other approaches and other creative endeavors.
Without a doubt. Shout out to the late, great Leonard Cohen.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, indeed.
You mentioned, scribes, people writing about music and newspapers. You mentioned briefly, and I got a nice comment from Brad Wheeler, who's listening right now. Brad writes for the Globe and Mail. Brad says, the world needs a Triumph Rush supergroup, a farewell to the sport of kings. Can Rik make it happen? And you know what? I'm going to tie this with another question that came in, because Brad Wheeler is looking for the Triumph Rush supergroup. He wants you to make it happen. We'll get back to that. Jim Romanko, who I actually saw the Trans-Canada Highwaymen with at the Horseshoe like 2 weeks ago, and that's kind of a fun new Canadian, supergroup. Jim writes, Rik, have you ever thought of putting together a Canadian hard rock supergroup? You could try to recruit Alex Lifeson from Rush and Brian Greenway from April Wine. I'm not sure who would play drums, but multi-talented Chris Murphy from Sloan appears to always be open to joining Canadian supergroups. So, Rik, what do you say to Brad Wheeler and Jim Romanko, who are trying to put you in a Canadian hard rock supergroup?
Okay. Well, geez. Well, I got a lot of thoughts. For the first thought I have is, I have been trying to learn how to say no, and it's a really hard word, for me. And I said yes. I'm going to Sweden to play a gig on New Year's. The Junior World Hockey Championships happen, and some friends of mine have a band that gets together, and it's not a super group, but it's a pretty damn good one. And it's got Larry Gowan's brother Terrence is playing bass, and the drummer is a guy named Mike Schotten that I know very well, and I've made a record with him in the past. And Bob McAlpine's playing some guitar, and Gavin Hope is one of the singers. And so anyway, so they said, Rik, why don't you come? We'll do some Triumph songs. We'll do some of and you can write new arrangements if you like. And we're going to have a string quartet. And my friend Claudio Vena is going to go there and wrangle up 3 Swedish string players. And there's going to be a horn section. I go, Triumph songs with horns and strings. Right. I go, okay, I can't resist. Yes. All right, I'll come. So I'm going to Sweden to play. But I haven't played a live gig in years now, like literally years. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part, when it comes to Geddy and Alex, let me just say that, my news feed, because I tend to, in my news feed, I get a lot of guitar magazine stuff and those kinds of things. So I've been absolutely inundated with Geddy lately. Right. Just because, his book is out, his memoir is out, and it's great. And it's full of amazing stories. And then he did these really clever high-end things of playing live, going out and doing these live interview things and dragging his friends out to interview him. And he got Alex up here in Toronto. And okay, so having said all that, I understand the brotherhood of a trio. I was in one for a long time. And that thing of fraternity, you see it that Alex and Geddy have it, and they had it with Neil. And then the fact that that's gone, but I really sense that there's something afoot there. I could see those guys, but I don't think they'd want to do a super group. I think they would want to try to find drummers that can fit, and I don't. It's hard to imagine that somebody could, fit, sit on Neil's throne, as it were, But I think that's probably where they might go for a couple of things. I don't think they'd want to be doing a super group. I honestly don't. And Alex sat in the other day with Tool. He got up on stage at Massey Hall and played with Tool. So I go, okay, well, clearly he's got the bug. His juice is still flowing. I'm going to wait until after Sweden to find out if mine still is.
Okay, let me know, because you might know this, but Alex Lifeson has a new side project called, I guess it is not a side project if Rush is retired, but it's a Envy of None, it's called. And playing drums in that band is FOTM David Quinton Steinberg, who takes my call, by the way. That is a brag. I just want to throw it out there. He takes my calls.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I could make, I feel like I should, if you have any interest at all, we'll see how Sweden goes, but I'll make a call with David Quinton Steinberg and see if the, everybody, can get the Triumph Rush supergroup that they're aching for.
Yeah. Well, and he plays on those demos of Geddy's that have just come out. David was the drummer on that. Now, I have a Steinberg story. Do you want to hear?
Yeah, I would love it, because he was with the Mods. I got to hear any Steinberg story you got. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I was teaching music business at Humber College, and I booked him to come as a guest speaker one day. I'm thinking, okay, music lawyer kind of guy, but he played drums in a band. And he came, and he was in my class, and he was the most foul-mouthed guest speaker we ever had. There were more expletives that escaped his lips during his 30-minute harangue. Right. And I went, you gotta love that. You gotta love a lawyer that's willing to swear.
He played with Stiv Bators, right? So it's gonna rub off on the guy. And by the way, since you mentioned you're not technically a professor, right? You're a teacher.
Yeah. Okay. I never got a university degree. The only degree I have is the bruises on my head from the school knocks.
But I just want to shout you out, because I've become good friends with the members of Mono Whales, and they just won a Juno for Breakthrough. And when I had Mono Whales over to chat about their rising star, they gave enormous credit to you, Rik Emmett, as one of their teachers at Humber College for helping them immensely in their career. So I wonder, what pride do you feel when you hear Mono Whales on the radio, or you learn about yet another Juno Award or another sold-out gig? How do you feel, Rik?
I do feel a tremendous amount of, I'm not sure I want to call it pride. Because I guess it is, but it's more like just happiness for them. because it's a really, really hard thing to have it happen, and I had them all in different classes at different times. They were in my business classes, and here's a truism about Humber. When I was there teaching, often I was the one where Denny Christensen, God rest him, he would come to me and say, okay, we have a problem child. Will you please take this problem child on? And the first one was Sally. She was the one in the singer for the band. She was in my business class, and I think she'd flunked the class, already once or something. Okay, here's the story I like to tell about her. So she's asking me really good questions in class and stuff, and I can tell she's smart and there's talent there and all of that kind of stuff. But she's also the kind of kid that's looking out the window a lot, and not paying attention, and that kind of stuff. And then assignments, she's having a really hard time handing them in on time or whatever. I can't remember. But so I one day I say to her, I want to see you after class. And so we're standing in the hall, and I say, look, I'm going to do a thing with you where I haven't done this with anybody else. There's a David Bowie exhibit that's in town at the museum thing. And here's a link to the Ontario government, how to write marketing and business plans. So I want you to go and walk around the David Bowie thing and make notes, do whatever you got to do. And then I want you to take this form, this template of the governments of how to write and I want you to write me a marketing plan for your band based on what you learned from using David Bowie as a role model.
Right.
Because I could just sense that this was something she'd get. And so I said, you don't have to come to class anymore. You don't have to do any other assignments. This is what you need to do for me, and hand it in at the end of the term. And so when she handed it in, I said, this is worth 90s. This has got to be like a 93, 94. I can't, there's nothing wrong with this. This is fantastic. And of course it was a thing that she was thinking about the motto was. Like, this is really inception. It's not, they're not anywhere near down the road yet. But
right.
And then I had a guitar player in my songwriting class, I think with her at the same time, but also the drummer, whose name I can't remember, but he might have been the smartest one of them all. He was the one that seemed to have the kind of the business guile, marketing.
That's Zach Zanardo. Oh, well, so the drummer's Jordan Circosta. Jordan.
Yeah.
And the guitarist is Zach Zanardo.
Yeah, and Zach was the one that was the most kind of rock star, Keith Richards. I wasn't sure that they could. Yeah, whatever. So, but yeah, I loved the band. I loved what they were about, and I taught all of them. They had a keyboard player named Holly too that was with them, and she was in my songwriting class for a while. I don't think she's in the band anymore.
I think she's in Goodnight Sunrise or something. I feel like she's got her own thing going on, but I don't. Yeah, I got to look into that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, they were all gifted, creative folks, and I'm really happy that they've been able to keep it together. I can remember sitting down with them once and having that classic discussion of here's the songwriter kind of front person, and she's going, well, they're making the rhythm section's making noises about wanting a piece of the action, and I go, well, you're going to have to work this one out for sure, because it goes right to the heart of why the Beatles broke up and why the Police broke up. So figure it out early if you can.
But imagine if you are an aspiring trio, because you're right, they became a trio at some point, Mono Whales, and that's where they've had this success. But imagine you're an aspiring trio and you're able to be mentored by a member of one of the world's great trios, like Rik Emmett is your mentor. That's a pretty sweet situation for the band. No wonder they're having success.
Well, yeah, okay.
Okay, yeah, you can just take it. Just take it, yeah.
My own horn just got tooted.
Well, here, let me just burn through just a couple more to boost your, as if you need your ego boosted on Toronto Mike. But Darren wrote in when he heard you were returning. He said, very simple little sentence. He said, "Thank you for the music, Rik." There's a lot of that sentiment. Just thank you for the music. There's still people tonight who are gonna, throw late on the line and all these great songs. But Hamilton Mike wrote in and said, I'm just a big fan of his songwriting, his guitar playing, and that he is quintessentially a regular, down-to-earth guy at heart. Being a rock star must be hella fun, but being a decent human being is always better.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and I've tried to sort of be that kind of a person. And to me, the biggest thing was always that I wanted to fall. First of all, my and this is in my memoir,
lay it on the line
very clearly all the time, that my family always came first. That was always my biggest priority. Even though the career is something that gets in the way and eats up too much time and takes too much energy and stuff. But the most important people on the planet to me are my kids and my wife. And so that's a pretty straightforward, ordinary kind of, it's not really a rock star kind of thing to have as a priority, but for me it was. And then the next thing was music and creativity and art. And that wasn't necessarily career. And I think there's a lot of rock stars where the career thing is really important, if they got the right haircut and if they got the right shoes, and, and I think even David Lee Roth, there's a quote of his where it was like, look, at a certain point, rock and roll, it's all about your haircut and your shoes. And it is kind of, that there's a side of it where, but I mean, when I would teach my music business classes, the first day I would write on the board a quote from Hunter S. Thompson, which was like, the music business is a long, shallow, plastic hallway filled with pimps and thieves and murderers and, where good men go to die like dogs. There's also a negative side. And I would write that on the board, and I would say, this is really, you have to understand that this is kind of the truth, that this is not an easy thing that you're setting out to try and accomplish. And you're going to have a hide as thick as a rhinoceros, because there is going to be all of this bad, negative stuff, but you always got to kind of emerge smelling like roses and going, that's okay. I make music for a living. I'm an artist. That's what I do. And as long as that will always resurrect you and save you, then you're good, So, and by the way, those monorails, I think they understood that very well.
Absolutely. Now, earlier, I had a question for you from Jim, who's trying to get you in the supergroup with Chris Murphy, who's already in like 4 other supergroups. So I don't know how he's going to fit you in. But
yeah, Jim
mentioned April Wine, and we recently lost FOTM Miles Goodwin. Shout out to Ridley Funeral Home. I when I think of 70s Canadian rock stars, I think of April Wine. I think of Triumph. I wondered if you had any words to say about the late Miles Goodwin.
Oh, I have lots of stories. April Wine opened for Triumph on a run of dates in Texas back in the day, and we shared bills with them. And then, later on in my career, I would play on a bill with them. I can't remember, like Kingston or someplace like that, where, my band played in the afternoon and those guys were playing in the evening. And Miles, I think Gil Moore, the drummer from Triumph, I think he ended up having a tighter kind of a relationship with Miles and knew him better than I did. And of course, I was always yakking up the other guitar players, Brian, and I can't remember the guy that was one of the original guitar players in the band. And they always had like 3 of them or 4 of them, because Miles played too. And they would have all of these, harmony guitar parts. And Brian had his own record deal at one point too in the States. Anyways.
David Henman?
Sorry?
Just help me out. Oh, was it David Henman, the guitarist you're thinking of, one of the brothers? Or
yeah, he didn't last. Right. But, and of course, one of the most gregarious guys in that band was Jerry, the drummer, Jerry Mercer. And he was a lovely guy to be able to chat with and hang with. And it was a great band. And the records that they made where they had, I think Mike Stone produced, and so the vocals were big and wide and shiny like Journey records, and great guitar harmony parts and stuff. And Miles was always a kind of a serious guy. There wasn't a lot of laughter in his lifestyle, but he was an astute business guy. At one point, he did what there was a Canadian cartoonist, maybe Donato or somebody like that had gone and become one of the guys that lived in the Caymans or something. And then Miles did exactly the same thing. He went and lived in Bahamas or the Caymans for a while because he was tax sheltering. And I went,
right.
Well, there's a guy he's thought a few things through, that guy.
All right. While we're remembering, I just want to take this opportunity to point out, since your last appearance on Toronto Mic'd, we lost both of the founders of Attic Records. We lost FOTM Alex Mayer, and we lost Tom Williams. And of course, as we discussed in your first visit, Rik, Attic Records was a big part of like making Triumph happen. And I'm wondering if you have any words about Alexander Mayer and Tom Williams at Attic Records.
Well, I mean, obviously, we owed the first rung on the ladder of trying to climb up was the fact that this story has been told a few times, but when Gil and Mike came to recruit me into Triumph, they came to the Hollywood Tavern in Etobicoke, and they sat at a table, and I played a set, and then I came over to talk to them because they were there to try and recruit me. And I was not necessarily sold on the thing, but when I was sitting at the table, Levine, who, by the way, at the time had a beard that made him look like Moses, and he slid this check, and I can't remember if it was 1,000 or 10,000, but whatever. It was a Attic Records with the Attic Records logo on it, and they said, "Yeah, well, we've got a deal with Attic. We're going to make we've got a single that's coming out, and then we're going to have we can make an album if they like the band. So that's why we want you in the band because they're going to like you." And I went, a record company. Wow, we're going to be able to make a record. Well, it was a very, and that was really because Mike Levine knew Tom Williams very well, and they were pals because of marketing records and doing record promo, and so they knew each other from that. From that bailiwick, and so Tom was the first guy that I met, and then Al had been the guy that he'd been Gordon Lightfoot's sort of manager publishing kind of guy, and then it got bought out, and the money that I think that when Lightfoot finally said, "You know what, I'm buying you out, Al, I want my own catalog back, I'm going to run it myself, thank you very much." I think Al took the money and decided, hey, I'm going to partner up with Tom and start this record label, an indie record label. So when I met Al, I was very intimidated by him, stern looking guy with, the big glasses and this was a guy, connected to Gordy Lightfoot. So that was like, ooh, that was as high up in the Canadian music business as you could get, So anyhow, they both turned out to be great guys, and they were believers. They did like me, the Triumph guys were right, and they believed in my ability and my talent, and that was a nice thing. And then even years later, Al, would make noises about wanting to sign me again, and I would be going like, "Hey, Al, thanks, but maybe I'll start my own little label or something. I don't know what I'm going to do, but anyways, Al was great." And then when he got inducted into Somcorn, it was the Canadian Independent Music something. I got up at the thing and sang an acoustic version of "Lay It on the Line" to Al, and I did a shout out to him in the lyrics and stuff, and yeah, it was good fun.
So you mentioned Gil Moore and Mike Levine finding you at Hollywood Tavern. I just want to take a moment here because I'm speaking to you from South Etobicoke, and I could probably throw a stone and hit that location, but I don't think everybody knows this, but Hollywood Tavern on the Queensway, that became the House of Lancaster. So I know it. I knew it. Now it's gone. They demolished it. Shout out to Ridley Funeral Home. But Hollywood Tavern is the building that became the House of Lancaster on Queensway, not too far east of Royal York, basically.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And I can remember it. Now, it wasn't all of the Blue Rodeo guys, but I went to high school, and Basil Donovan, who bass player from Blue Rodeo, he had a group of musician pals, and when we were playing there with Act 3, they came one night and they were all sitting at a table and shouting out requests for Yes material. I do remember that, like trying to challenge me in the third or fourth set of the night. Like, yeah, but can you play Mood for a Day? Can you play The Clap? Hey,
love it, love it. Yeah. Hey, so again, we've established this is Rik Emmett's second appearance, and I'm about to get into the book here, of course, but because I have a great comment from Steven about it. But I didn't ask you a question the first time you were on, Rik, and it haunted me ever since. Like, I'm glad Blair told you to get your butt back on Toronto Mike. This is good news for me. So here's the question. In 1985, there was a charity single for African famine relief. Tears Are Not Enough. Bruce Allen, David Foster, we all know the kind of the story. But Rik Emmett, that's you. You're not to be heard on Tears Are Not Enough. And I need, for the record, definitively, I need to find out, were you asked to be a part of Tears Are Not Enough?
Yes, I was. Yes, I was. And I was on tour, and we were in, I even recall, we had done a thing where we played some Florida dates, and then we were driving around the Gulf, and we were in just out of Louisiana, kind of, and maybe into Texas. So I can't remember the town, but a motel. And there was no way I could have gotten a flight and made it up and then made it back to the next gig. And it was pissing rain. It was a horrible weather thing that was going on down in the Gulf at this point. And but they had invited me, and I really wanted to do it. And I think I was trying to negotiate, like, well, could I film something and send it up? Could I participate in some other, but they kind of went, well, we got lots of other folks we can slot in there. So, and I felt bad because it would have been a great thing to be a part of, plus I didn't know a lot of those people. So that would have been a nice thing to maybe be able to show up at the studio and I've never met Brian. I have met David Foster, and that was great. That was at the last Walk of Fame thing that we did. He was there, and sort of the night, the party before the night, they have all the people come for a dinner and stuff.
Wow.
And David got up and played piano and sang some songs and sort of was the MC, and he's an extremely gregarious kind of Hollywood style individual. Lots of energy. He's great. So anyhow. Yeah.
So you wished you could have been a part of it. I'm glad to hear you were invited, because I just talked to Randy Bachman, and he did not get invited because Bruce Allen was pissed at some BTO deal that went south or something and slighted Randy. So Randy never got the call to participate, but you got the call. You just were unavailable due to a scheduling conflict.
Yeah, I never got the call personally, but I think they'd called like the office, and then the office had and at the time, cell phones were probably, I think,
no, 85. I don't think there were any hanging around cell phones.
So those guys would have, been the ones that were checking in with the office. I never did, and then they probably came to me at a sound check or something and said, "Hey, the Tears Are Not Enough people." I'm not sure they called it that at that point. That's in the wake of it that it's called the Tears Are Not Enough thing, but. Whatever. It was like, hey, Foster and Adams are looking. Yeah. So anyhow.
So a couple of quick little tidbits, because I'm mildly fascinated with this charity single. But one is that it turns out Leonard Cohen also was in Copenhagen or something and couldn't be in two places at once. But they did make an exception. There is one individual who had a scheduling conflict, and they literally flew, Jim Valance, I think, flew to Germany to record him separately and bring the tapes back to Toronto. And that was Bruce Cockburn. So apparently, Rik, you're no Bruce Cockburn.
No, No, and I would admit that quite readily. Yeah, no, I'm no Bruce Cockburn. And Bruce and I have done a television show together, and played together, had rehearsals together. You know, I like, it was kind of like I was sitting in with his band.
Wow.
And it was really a lot of fun. There was a thing called In Session that they used to do in Hamilton.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've always been a tremendous admirer of Bruce. He also came when I was running the song studio thing at Humber in the summertime, and Blair and I, that was a workshop thing that we started. We gave him an award one year. It was a way to sort of get him to come out and, you know, appear and do a little speech and be there for an afternoon lunch kind of thing. And him and Bernie Finkelstein came.
Yes.
And yeah, and he's a very intense guy. But Bruce does have like a sense of humor, and you know, he's just a very intensely gifted kind of artist. So that, you know, there can be a level of intimidation there. I can understand why they would want him. He was maybe a little even more iconic in the whole Canadian music industry thing than I was, you know, being in Triumph. I mean, Triumph was always, you know, overshadowed by the whole Rush thing in any case, right? So, you know, there was nobody that really overshadowed Bruce, you know, like.
What about Neil Young? Okay. Okay. Everybody gets overshadowed by somebody, but you brought up the Triumph Rush thing. So I'm going to slide right into Steven's question. Steven writes,
yeah,
I read Rik's autobiography and he came off as super smart and a good person. I'll pause for you to take a bow. That's
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
He's definitely one musician you can be proud to be a fan of. Of course, there are many others, but in these times of Me Too, he sticks out as genuine and decent. So this is Steven talking. Then it gets to the question. Do you, Rik Emmett, ever get tired of the comparisons between Triumph and Rush, two kick-ass rock trios to come out of Toronto? And with your voice, the comparisons were inevitable. Do you ever get tired?
Well, you know, there's a petty side of me that goes, yes, I'm tired of it. But, you know, the larger part of me thinks we were lucky that their coattails were, I've said this many times in interviews, you know, Rush is they're a one-of-a-kind kind of band in the world of bands. So, and I would say they're in a class with, for example, Yes would be a band like that. Pink Floyd would be a band like that. Rush is a band like that. They're progressive, but they're kind of hard rock. New Dream Theater is kind of a band like that. You know, Triumph was not a band like any of those kinds of bands. When I was in it, I tried to push it to become a band that would be kind of a band like that. And I think some of the material that I wrote could have taken it towards. But the other two guys in Triumph were not really those kinds of artists, musicians. They really weren't. That's not how they saw the band, you know. And, you know, I'm fine with all of that. I don't have any unhappiness about any of that. The Rush thing was about an ensemble, playing ensemble style progressive rock, where the parts that they come up with are really, really important to what the music is about. It's not really song-oriented, and Triumph really always had a very song-focused orientation, you know, and relatively straightforward kinds of songs that you would hope would get on the radio, not because they were selling a band's image or a band's musicality, but because radio would go, yeah, this is something we can really play, you know. Yeah, so there was a big difference between us and Rush in the way that we approached things. But of course, that superficial thing. You're a trio from Toronto with a you know, a soprano lead singer.
Right.
You know, it's like, yeah.
Well, no, thanks for the honesty there. David has a question. He writes, after swearing that he'd never play with Triumph again, and then in parentheses, I love that band, why did Rik agree to the reunion in Europe a couple of years ago, and why wasn't there a hometown Toronto show?
Right. Okay. So the person that said he would never play with Triumph again was a person that I decided I didn't want to be. And in the same way that I guess the guys in the Eagles kind of went, you know what? I think I can be a better person. I think hell can freeze over because I think, I want to see if I can't. There was a song that Don Henley wrote. I think it was called Heart of the Matter. And the lyric was something along the lines of, you keep carrying around that anger, it's going to eat you up inside, or something along those lines. And my brother had talked me into, like, look, you got to do this for me. He was dying of cancer at the time. And that was the thing that sort of pushed me. So where I went, okay, I have to try and find out if I can be a bigger person, have a smaller ego and be a bit better person. So that was what started. And then once I sat down and talked to them, and we did some of those music industry, Hall of Fame kinds of things, I realized I'm a lot better for having my brothers back, these two guys that I'd been in the trenches with, than to be standing on my own stupid pride, So that was why I did. And we went to Sweden because we thought, well, if we really fuck it up, we're on the other side of the world, no one will really know. So I think that was part of it. But I also think that when we said yes to that, then our agent came back and said, well, you could go 2 weeks later, you can play Rocklahoma down in Oklahoma. And we went, okay. And then we thought, hey, if we say okay to these things, there's probably going to be more. Right. And I think we did have an expectation that there was going to be more. And we played a couple of them, and then Gil went, I think I've had enough. I think I don't want to have to do this anymore. So that was why there was never a Toronto one, because I think Gil kind of felt like, and when you're asking a guy in his 70s to play drums and sing, I mean, ask Phil Collins, how's it going? It's a tough thing. They end up having problems with their backs, right, and arthritis and stuff, and it gets debilitating to the point where they can't really do it. And Gil sang half the tunes, right? So not only are you asking the guy to, so it was a big ask to keep going to play more gigs, so we didn't.
Mark says, can you ask Rik Emmett's opinion on the Triumph album they made without him, recruiting Phil X, who subsequently replaced Richie Sambora in Bon Jovi?
Yes. Well, first of all, I love Phil, and I think he's an incredibly great guitar. I liked when I first heard him playing on Frozen Ghost records, I went, hey, he's special. He really is good. And he really is. He's a tremendous electric guitar player. And I think one of the things about that album, Edge of Excess, is that you can hear what Gil kind of thought the band Triumph should be. And Triumph was always kind of his band. He was the leader on Contracts. I said this in the documentary. One of the reasons we had that horrible thing that happened on the Supported Kings records with Ron Nevison was that Ron didn't realize that Triumph was Gil's band. He was trying to take songs away from Gil and make me be the singer. And I went, right, it ain't going to fly, Ron. Like, you don't understand where, how this is, right, formulated. So when I left, and then Gil went, okay, I'm going to try to make this band be something that this is the way I see it. I think there you go. And I was trying to work with that and work inside that when I was in it. But, I would sometimes have to push at Gil and Mike in order to get them to accept some of the things that I wanted to do. And my side of the band, there would be, acoustic guitar pieces on records, and there would be songs that started with acoustic, and I'd be singing them like I was, James Taylor or whatever, and then the songs would blossom and get bigger. And whole sort of, I don't know what you call it, symphonic approach to making records, like the Brian Wilson Beach Boys thing, where it starts out with one thing, and then before you know it, there's been a key change, and oh my God, now there's been a tempo change, and now you've got something, and it's all happening in 3.5 minutes. There was a time when radio embraced that, and man, that was the triumph that I really thought, this is great. The Allied Forces album, Fight the Good Fight, Magic Power, that kind of stuff. That was right up my alley of, this is what I want Triumph to be. But I think Gil always wanted it to be the kind of band that could fit on the US Festival Day with Ozzy and Judas Priest and Scorpions and all that kind of stuff. He wanted something that was more driving and straight ahead. So, hey, it was what it was, and
right.
I don't have anything bad to say about that record or about Phil. There was a time when Jim Norris, the Canadian Musician magazine, he set up a thing once. It was at the Phoenix or something. It was a snowy, wintry day, and I just left Triumph, and Jim phoned me and he said, "Look, I hope you don't mind, but I've invited Phil X too. He's going to be there. Is that okay?" And I went, "Yeah, it's perfectly fine. Sure, that's fine." And I'd never actually met him, in person.
Right.
And so when I met him at this thing, I walked up to him and I shook his hand, and I held his hand tight and looked him right in the eye. And I said, "Man, I wish you all the best. No one on the planet Earth knows more about what you're getting yourself into than me. And I want to wish you all the very best."
Right. That's true.
I was good with him, before I met him, I was good with him. But after that, I think we were good. We were tight. It was cool.
Love it. All right. Midtown Gord, he's listening right now. Midtown Gord writes, "Hey, Mike, I have a comment and a kind of awkward question for Rik." Okay. "I've been a long-time fan. This is for you, Rik. I had your book before the official release date, and I couldn't put it down. By the way, everybody, this is Mike talking now. Lay it on the line. A backstage pass to Rockstar Adventure, Conflict, and Triumph is available now, and all these stories and more in the book, and it's fantastic." But back to Gord's note. He goes, "As I read, I was struck by the fact that you and Jeanette lived at 530 Dufferin Street when you were married. When I Googled it for shits and giggles, I see it was near Dufferin and Gordon. Well, when I was first married in 1991, we lived at Sheridan, just on the other end of Gordon Street. So it is fitting that Gordon Enright and Richard Gordon Emmett each lived at the end of Gordon Street, although at different times. My question, I appreciate, lots going on here. I appreciate that you were straightforward with your feelings and experiences in this book, and I am disappointed in other Triumph fans complaining that you seem to not look too fondly on your Triumph days. Their opinion, not mine. How do you feel about those comments, Rik?"
Well, one of the things that I've discovered about writing a memoir and putting it out, maybe this is true of any author that writes a book and you put it out, the people that read it they're going to interpret it, and they're going to be revealing things about themselves in the way that they read it and the way that they interpret it, as opposed to necessarily A, what I put in there, and B, what the majority of folks might think is in there. You're going to have, and I mean, at one point my wife, she says, read me an Amazon review. And some guy goes, "Oh, this is bullshit. It says Triumph on the cover and there's hardly anything in there. And I wanted more dirt about Triumph. And there's only one chapter in there about Triumph. What the hell, And so I go, yeah, okay, well, that's his opinion, and he's entitled to that. And I won't say that that's wrong, but my life, I've had 70 years of it, and Triumph was 13. So, it's only going to be one chapter because it's my book, and I'm going to decide, well, the Triumph chapter, and I didn't want to get into a lot of dirt about the band. I really didn't, because I don't think the other guys deserve that. I don't think the legacy deserves that. I think I was pretty fair, and I think I I get to see Gil and Mike still, and we have Christmas dinner together.
Oh.
And, yeah, we always try to get together every year and have a Christmas dinner. And I get along good with those guys. Gil let me come into the Metalworks last week. We had 2 rehearsals for the Sweden thing. Like, I have a good relationship with those guys, and I didn't want to do anything in my memoir that was going to put that in any kind of jeopardy. Or I had friends of mine and lawyers read it to make sure that there was nothing that would be litigious. So if somebody thinks that, I gave an impression of not being happy about the Triumph years, I go, well, that's kind of news to me. Hey, I left it. I gave my notice and I left the band. So obviously, at the end, I wasn't too happy. And then, okay, there were 20 years where I didn't really talk to those guys. Okay. But still, I managed to figure it out in a lifetime. That's pretty good.
Well, you managed to lay it on the line. By the way, writing a memoir, does that mean it's time to die? Like, you have many good years left. You're not done yet. Exactly. No. And so there's something very surreal about doing these the round of interviews and stuff to promo, and you're talking about everything in the past tense. And I feel like, the Monty Python thing where guys, I'm not dead yet. Right.
Bring out your dead. No, I'm not dead. I feel like going for a walk. No, you're on your last legs here. Yeah. So I feel like what's happened here is I've kind of come to the end of Act 2, and Act 3 has begun in my life, and it's about writing. I wrote a book of poetry. I wrote this memoir, and I'm going to keep doing it. And I don't feel like I'm going to ever stop being creative. But, back to one of your earlier questions, do I feel like going back out on the road to play gigs in some supergroup? And having to do sound checks where I have to tell Alex Lifeson his amp is too loud. I'm going, Alex, you're killing me here. It's too loud. Turn it down. Which, by the way, Bruce Coburn told me once at a rehearsal. Can you turn your amp down, Rick? It's a little too loud. Yeah. So, I honestly, I don't want to do that, but my life is not over. I intend to have a lot of fun in the next 25 or 30 years. I like that Act 3 begins now, because Act 3 was, you were in Act 3 before Triumph. I was. And we once had a guy come to us at a bar gig, and he goes, oh, man, 3, the final act, the last act. And we're going, yeah, okay. What have you been smoking? Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Act 3, yeah.
Oh, speaking, because I mentioned Act 3, the Blinding Light Show, is that the only Act 3 song that you brought to Triumph?
Yeah. Well, yes. Yeah, it was the only one that made any sense. Act 3 had been a very progressive kind of entity, and not afraid to try. We would play a set where we would play Queen songs and excerpts from Albert Lee's Head, Hands and Feet. Chris Brockway, the bass player in that band, tremendously gifted musician. And we liked Yes and Gentle Giant and King Crimson. There was a lot of things that we did. And the drummer, Denton Young, he went on to have a band called Zon, and it was very theatrical. And he would sing like Queen Sheer Heart Attack, the Stone Cold Crazy. That was the song. It was, so the band was very adventurous. And then when I went to play with Triumph, it wasn't going to be, I was going to have to push to try to get it to be adventurous. And Blinding Light Show was one of the things that could sort of fall into the wheelhouse. But there's a riff in the Blinding Light Show. It goes like, it went like a down to the down to but when we wrote it in Act 3, it was like down to down to down 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 like it was in a bar of 9, like. And so when I played it for the Triumph guys, they go, can we make that be in 4/4? And I think the It was also in like 7 or something, right? So once I made those adjustments, Triumph went, okay, we can do that.
Now, Rick, I know I asked for an hour, and I now see I've taken the hour. I have like listeners of mine who love Triumph and love Rik Emmett. Can I get 10 more minutes?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Sure.
You're right. You have trouble saying no. So maybe I should ask for 20 minutes.
No.
You got to work on saying no. Okay. So I'll burn through this. Yeah. Sorry.
You know why I like going on Toronto, Mike? Because you teach me how to say no. And I like that.
Well, we'll see. When I get to hour 3, we'll see if I get a no out of you. Okay.
Oh, God.
Almost done. Mike from KDub.
Okay. I have COVID. Come on, stop.
I know, but you sound great for a guy with COVID. You're one of the lucky ones, I think.
I'm feeling better.
No brain fog for you. Okay, Mike from KDub. Curious what Rik Emmett thinks of the Burton Cummings, Randy Bachman lawsuit against their former bandmates, saying they're a Guess Who cover band. Fighting words for sure. Any thoughts on this for Mike from KDub? This is an ongoing lawsuit.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an interesting thing, of course, that I think it was Jim Cale ended up with owning the name, because at a certain point, both Burton and Randy had gone, well, we've gone off for our own careers and we're doing great. And then, the thing you realize about legacy is that it takes about 20 or 30 years before you realize, hey, guess who had a better legacy than my own solo career did. Right. So I don't know. I mean, part of the thing that people always give me credit for and praise is this whole thing of sort of being a nice guy and integrity and ethics and stuff. And that's a double-edged sword, So this is what I have to say about this situation, integrity. When John Bonham died and Led Zeppelin decided, you know what? Without him, it's not Led Zeppelin. So we're not going to do Led Zeppelin anymore. There was an integrity to that I really appreciated. I thought, this is the way it should go, But having said that, I also understand the reality of stuff, and Bonham and Plantin and Page, John Paul Jones, they're entitled, because they were a part of what it was. They are entitled to move on with their life and then evolve or mutate whatever Led Zeppelin might have been into whatever, So in the Bachman Cummings case, they were the principal songwriters. They were the singers, and I think it's a really unfortunate thing that what ended up happening was this kind of pale comparison to what the original was ends up becoming a cash cow for somebody that's taking it out but I mean, I think I don't quote me on this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyways. I think at one point Chicago, the Chicago Transit Authority, because it was such a huge band, they literally could have 2 versions of Chicago out touring, one in the summertime, one playing the sheds in the West Coast and one, playing on the East Coast. And a couple of the guys in the band would be over in that one and a couple of the guys in the band would be over in the other one. And they could call them both Chicago and they weren't lying, and you go, well, I don't know. That sort of seems like you're stretching the integrity of the thing, right. Maybe further than I could personally. But I don't think, honestly, here's my take, and now as a music business teacher, all right? Judges in a court of law will often opt for the law. They look for what the language in the contract says. And if Cale owns that brand name and the right to be able to exploit it, I think Bachman and Cummings have got a tough row to hoe in a court of law. I think what they're hoping to do is have the guy go, all right, I'll settle. Just write me one more check,
Right.
and I'll call it a day, but that's just because I used to have to teach a little bit of music business law, and that's my understanding of stuff.
Very interesting perspective. Jim writes, hey, Rick, back in the 1990s, our Mississauga softball team called Fishbone played your team a few times. You remember Fishbone?
I do. They were a fantastic team. I loved that team because they were named after a band. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Yeah.
So Jim writes, I seem to remember it was a family affair with your brother and father as a coach, also on the squad. I also remember for a so-called older guy in his 40s from our mid-20s perspective, you still had very good wheels and could motor around the bases at a very good clip. After the game, you dropped by our picnic table to say hello. I decided to point out that you really did lay it on the line tonight. My teammates groaned, but you were good-natured about it, which I thought was very nice of you. How often does that happen, if ever, is the question from Jim. Like, do people tell you, you really laid it on the line tonight, Rick?
Yeah, it does come up from time to time, yes. It's okay, and I like it. And it's great that doing the show and I get to hear these kinds of things, that's a sweet memory. And we really did respect and like that team. There were some teams, I mean, you can imagine, middle-aged guys playing slow pitch softball. Sometimes it could turn into asshole land in a hurry.
Rick, I played for 15 years in the RSPA slow pitch, and I would often think, I'm like a father. I'm going to be in a parking lot after this game throwing down, like we're going to throw punches. It got really intense out there for slow pitch.
Yes, and we had some guys on our team that were good players, but they, they could sort of push the envelope towards, this game is, is getting a little out of hand,
Right.
And I was not, and my brother and my dad, we weren't necessarily keen on that either, but sometimes you sort of need some good guys, you want to have a competitive team. And
right.
Anyhow, and at a certain point, the other thing about me, which maybe your listeners don't know, but I do have a kind of a short fuse. Like my emotions can sometimes get the better of me.
Wow.
And so when I played sports, I had this thing. I played to win. I probably would have been a sort of a Kenny Linsman kind of a hockey player.
The rat, absolutely.
Slash Karlomov's ankles kind of a guy. And that probably doesn't go well with this image I keep trying to project of myself as a very ethical and wonderful human being. Anyhow, it's really nice of that guy to, what is the guy's name again?
Jim Romanko.
Well, Jim,
Jim,
so
like,
much.
Jim.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for writing in and reminding me of that. That was great. And I have a picture here in my studio of my brother and my dad and me in those purple Cadillacs uniforms, all standing like this and posing. And we had some good years there. We won the championship one year.
Wow.
League. 93, I think. What year did he say it was? 92, 93?
He just says he doesn't say specifically, I don't think. He just said the 90s.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we always loved playing those guys because they had a really nice team attitude. They were very chill about the way they went about it. They were like a rock band playing a gig, having fun, kind of like a baseball team. And we loved that about them. And they were good too. They were a challenge to play. So
you still a big baseball fan?
I am. Yeah. And I have friendships. I know Gibby pretty good, John Gibbons, that managed the Jays, and occasionally, hook up with him, emails or whatever. He had a podcast. I think I did an interview on it once.
Well, you know what? He had to stop the podcast because he's now part of the coaching staff for the New York Mets.
Yeah, good for him.
So he's back.
Yes.
All right, we're almost. You've been amazing, Rick. I don't want to get a no from you. I'll be the first guy to get a no from you. So really quickly, Mark says, did Rik Emmett have a column in the Toronto Star? I remember that, but I don't see anything online. For the record, did you?
never had a column, but Gil he knew Peter Goddard well. Yeah. And Goddard would sometimes ask me to do guest reviews. I reviewed an AC/DC movie once, concert movie. I think I might have written a thing once on New Year's about what it meant to be Canadian. So I would have guessed things from time to time in the Star. But
right, Peter Goddard missed. There's a guy that's missed. He was great, but in your book, it's funny. I'm reading your great memoir here, Lay It on the Line, and there's you noted a bad review from Jonathan Gross, and I just had Jonathan Gross here about maybe 2 months ago to talk about his career. He co-wrote an episode of Seinfeld, which is kind of his claim to fame, but it's interesting how much power these newspaper writers had back in the day. Like that power, sadly, the magic power, if you will, is gone. But the Peter Goddards, the Jonathan Gross, they wielded great power.
They did, and I think neither. Well, let me try to put it in perspective. I think they didn't know the power they necessarily had, which sometimes then it led them to do things that they might have regretted. And the bands that we might have sort of thought that they had more power than they really did, and they might have thought they had more power than they really did. So that was the dynamic of it. And I can remember once, I think, there was a Triumph gig in town. Maybe it was Wonderland or something. And Gross was there, Jonathan Gross. And I ran into him. Like I was walking up a thing and he was there. And he was like a little... I seem to recall him kind of going, hey, sorry, or being a little sheepish or something. And I went, hey, you know what? You've got a job to do, and you're just doing your job. And I appreciate that. And I understand that. And if you thought we deserved to get our ass kicked, then, that was your call. That's not my call to make. That was yours, So will it stick with me? And has it over the years? Sure. But it's a funny thing that, after a few months, the thing that he wrote that I didn't have an original lick in my body, it became a thing where the other guys in the band would tease me and say, oh, Rick, it wasn't a very good night. You didn't have an original lick in your body. And so it becomes this kind of, you realize that you can take things really seriously and feel them intensely, but maybe they don't really have that layer of, they're not what you think they are. Maybe you should just kind of let it go, So I let that go a long time ago.
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed your return to Toronto, Mike. Rick, I feel like there's a third episode in you, so at some point we have to do this again. But if I may, sure. Listener Steve Cole, he sent me, he had a scrapbook, and he sent me a picture of his scrapbook, because in his scrapbook, he kept the Triumph rider from Canada Jam. So I'm reading the rider, which is wild. So just in closing here, and I think you credited, Mike Levine for negotiating this in the book here, but how did you end up closing Canada Jam and this getting everything in this rider? It's just quite the rider. I almost want to read it, but tell me how that happened for Canada Jam.
Well, the guy who was the promoter from Woodstock was one of the guys that was the promoter behind Canada Jam.
Is it Mike Lang? Michael Lang?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
I can't be sure about that. I think in my book I did the research and I did come up with the name.
Right.
Anyhow, he came to see Triumph playing out in Calgary, I think it was. And Mike was, having this conversation about trying to get onto and I think the Canada Jam people were going, well, we got to have some Canadian representation. We got to have some Canadian acts. And I think Mike was in there going, well, you want us because we are the biggest thing happening in Canada right now,
right,
on the rise. And it maybe wasn't true, but then this guy came and saw us play, and we were blowing off our flash pots and shooting off our, our flamethrower and stuff. And he was going, yeah, wow, okay, I definitely want to go in the bandwagon here. So, you guys will, be the first act of the show or whatever. And Mike goes, oh, no. We have to close the show. And he goes, well, no, well, you can't close the show. Yeah, well, we've got to have our big sign, and we've got to have our flash pots, and we've got to have our. And the guy goes, no, nobody's going to have any of that stuff. We got the Village people, and we got the Kansas, and we got the Commodores, and it's going to be this big long day of all these actions. We're not letting anybody have any special effects. You're all going to use the same PA and the same lights, and it's going to be a favored nations kind of thing. And Mike went, well, we'll go on last, and then that won't be an issue. And the guy went, you want to go on last? He goes, you realize that Jimi Hendrix went on at 6 a.m. because he wanted to go on last at Woodstock. You realize you want to go on last? Yeah, we want to go on last. And we went on. It was like 3:30 in the morning when we finally went on stage and played. But here's the thing, right?
Yeah.
All of the Canadian acts that were looking at this thing from afar going, what the hell is Triumph doing on that bill? Like, they don't belong there. Hey, like the guys from, I don't know, Trooper or Streetheart or whatever are going like, we've already sold 3 times the albums those guys have ever sold. Why are they on the act and we're not? And so then they're going, wait, they closed the show? They were the headliner? And so that's a superficial thing. People go, hey, when you close a big outdoor show, you're not a headliner. The headliners are, 8 o'clock at night, and they're going to be home in their beds, well fed, by midnight. No. So it was a horrible gig to have to play in the misty dew of late August night. But having said all that, then we play the show, and then we're trying to tell everybody after the fact, like, oh yeah, it was a great show. It was a great show. It was terrible. It was cold. There was nobody there. People were, there were 7 or 8 people shivering, huddled under their blankets,
But Rick, do you remember that? Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you remember that contract rider? Do you remember the, I don't even know how to say these names. I'm just looking at it. It was 6 bottles of Pouilly Fuisse. I don't even know how to say that. 6 40-ounce bottles of Chivas Regal, 4 Dom Perignon, 6 cases of Heineken, gin, vodka, steak, served on china with silverware, plus cherry cheesecake and Black Forest cake and fresh fruit, cigars, cigarellos, cigarettes. Like, this rider is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's also not true.
What? This is in the news. I'm looking at it in the newspaper, and there's a quote from Mike Levine, and he goes, and they went for it. We were amazed. It's got to cost the promoters $2,000, and we would have done the show for corned beef sandwiches and beer.
Yeah, well, Mike was very, very good at being able to sell a story. He was, that was one of his great strengths. And of course, Mike was the guy that would always, I think Mike was the guy that recommended Howard Bloom when we got the RCA record deal. He was the PR guy out of New York that a lot of big people used, and Mike insisted that RCA had to pay for Howard Bloom to be our publicist. So that strikes me as something that publicists decided, hey, let's write up this rider. They're going to say no. So it might be a little white lie when Mike says they said yes. I don't remember any of that. I do remember a bucket, like a plastic garbage bucket with ice in it and lots of beer.
Okay.
And then the night wore on and wore on and wore on. It was a bucket of just freezing cold water, and you had to reach down into it to get the beer at the bottom, and your hand would be numb searching around trying to find a beer in there. But that's what I remember.
Well, we don't print the legend on this show, Rick. Thanks so much for this. Merry Christmas to you and your family, and good luck in Sweden.
Thank you very much, Mike. I look forward to chatting with you again sometime.
And that brings us to the end of our 1,396th show. You could follow me on Twitter. I'm at Toronto Mike. I'm also on Blue Sky. Much love to all who made this possible. That's Great Lakes Brewery. Go to Great Lakes for your delicious fresh craft beer. That's Palma Pasta. Authentic Italian food. So delicious. Raymond James Canada, subscribe to the Advantaged Investor podcast. Moneris, subscribe to Yes We Are Open. Season 5 has been amazing. RecycleMyElectronics.ca and Ridley Funeral Home. See you all tomorrow when we celebrate Festivus with Elvis.
Well, I wanna take a streetcar downtown, read Henry Miller and wander around, and drink some Guinness from a tin. 'Cause my UI check has just come in. Ah, where you been? Because everything is coming up rosy and green. Yeah, the wind is cold, but the smell of snow warms me today. And your smile is fine, and it's just like mine, and it won't go away. 'Cause everything is rosy and green. Well, you've been under my skin for more than 8 years. It's been 8 years of laughter and 8 years of tears. And I don't know what the future can hold or will do for me and you. But I'm a much better man for having known you. Oh, you know that's true because everything is coming up rosy and green. Yeah, the wind is cold, but the smell of snow warms me today. And your smile is fine, and it's just like mine, and it won't go away. 'Cause everything is rosy and green. Well, I've been told that there's a sucker born every day. But I wonder who. Yeah, I wonder who. Maybe the one who doesn't realize there's 1,000 shades of gray. 'Cause I know that's true, yes I do. I know it's true, yeah. I know it's true. How about you? Oh, they're picking up trash and they're putting down roads. And they're brokering stocks, the class struggle explodes. And I'll play this guitar just the best that I can. Well, maybe I'm not, and maybe I am. Ah, who gives a damn? Because everything is coming up rosy and green. Yeah, the wind is cold, but the smell of snow warms me today. And your smile is fine, and it's just like mine, and it won't go away. 'Cause everything is rosy and green. Well, I've kissed you in France, and I've kissed you in Spain. And I've kissed you in places I better not name. And I've seen the sun go down on Sacré-Cœur. But I